Not going to be talking about my resume. Your Worship, you did that in a very flattering way, and I thank you. So what we're going to do today, what we're going to spend our time is I'm going to give you a municipal government 101 course. And normally when we do the 101 course, it takes anywhere from a day to 5 days to go through it when I'm dealing with staff or with members of council. We're going to do it in about 7 minutes. I want to talk about municipal powers because these are really fundamental to understanding what the role of council is and what the role of individual councils happens to be. And then we'll spend some time on accountability and transparency. I hear that phrase all the time. Our government needs to be more accountable, it needs to be more transparent. There's one of the questions that deals with that. Let me tell you this. Local government, municipalities in Ontario are the most accountable, most transparent level of government in Canada. There's no comparison, and I'll give you some examples of that a little bit later, demonstrate how that's the case. We're going to talk about roles and responsibility. Who is responsible for doing what? And how do you know who sets the roles? We'll spend some time on that. Interestingly, when I get called back to municipalities partway through a term, often the reason is there's a misunderstanding or a lack of respect for the roles, different roles that people are playing within the organization. Then I'm going to switch over and talk about some personal considerations. What impact does running for council have on your family? What impact does it have on your friends and your community? We'll talk about that. I'm going to spend a bit of time on codes of conduct, on conflict of interest, and on confidentiality. We'll cover all of those points off. We'll spend a few minutes talking about governance, how municipalities are structured in terms of their governance model, how councils make decisions, and that becomes a really significant one, and every governance model in the province is different, every one of them. So let's get started. When I do these sessions in person, and I'll do this tonight, I spend some time having people try to decide what services the municipality provides. And I think it's an important exercise, and if it's one that you've never stopped to think about, I encourage you to do so. If you can get to 75 or 80, you've done pretty well in terms of services provided. There are considerably more than that each municipality throughout this province. By the way, there are 444 municipalities in Ontario. A lot of different structures and a lot of different governments, different models, but they all fit into this umbrella in terms of responsibilities and in terms of powers that are given. Let me just give you a couple of examples of very quickly, and I'd like you to go back and fill it in. Municipalities have a lot to do with roads. We know that. Summer maintenance, we know that winter maintenance is a big issue, but municipalities design roads, build roads, and accept roads. Roads are not just for cars, vehicles, they're for pedestrians. They're also for services. Different utility services run under the road. So there's a list, you could do a checklist of 8, 10, maybe 20 things that municipalities do around their roads. They also regulate them. How fast you can drive, where you can park, where you can't park, all those series of things. Those are all municipal responsibilities. Municipalities run water systems for potable water and sewer systems. That's a huge area, and it's a very technical, complex one that a council needs to have considerable knowledge of. The other kind of water, that is drainage. Municipalities are involved on a regular basis in drainage issues as we go forward. Municipalities also operate libraries. Interestingly, council cannot operate a library. It's not allowed. If a municipality wants to have a library, a public library, it must set up a public library board. And that board is governed by specific legislation. And the council appoints the people to the board, but that board is responsible for the delivery of the service. There are other specific services that council is not responsible for, but those boards have a relationship, and those relationships are all different. Health unit, the library conservation authority, there are a number of them that come into play. Other types of services, emergency services, the municipality is responsible for. Fire and police and land ambulance are all issues. Municipality owns and has an official plan. That's an incredibly important function in every municipality, and certainly in the municipalities that there is considerable growth. Municipality licenses, licensed businesses, marriages are licensed by the municipality. It's a really significant list when you stop and think about it. And I've just touched on a few of them. There are a number more. But it's important to keep in mind that it's not merely the services that we see on a regular basis and we don't pay much attention to the others. Municipal government is a complex series of businesses, and council at the end of the day is responsible for those businesses. So let's do Municipal Government 101. Here's the start. All the powers for municipalities come from the province. Municipalities don't have any inherent jurisdiction. All the powers come from the province, so that if you're, as a municipality, looking to do something, you have to be able to look and find the authority somewhere in a statute or in a regulation. There's no inherent jurisdiction. The Municipal Act, interestingly, had never been rewritten for 150 years, and it was finally rewritten in 2001. And it turned the municipal sector upside down. Before 2001, municipalities received powers based on their size, and you could tell the size because of the name. So there were villages, and there were townships, and there were towns, and small cities, and big cities. And the powers increased depending on the size of the municipality. That all disappeared when the new act came into effect. Now there are only 3 kinds of municipalities in the province. There are single-tier municipalities, that's all of Northern Ontario, and that's some selected municipalities in Southern Ontario. So Ottawa, for example, and Kingston, Toronto, London, are all single-tier municipalities. And what it means, if you're a single-tier municipality, is you, as a municipality, get this bundle of powers that come from the province. And you get them all. So that the township of Ear Falls up in northwestern Ontario, which is a pretty small place, it's a great place, I love visiting there, but it's pretty small, has all the powers of the city of Ottawa. That's very different than what we had pre-2001. The other 2 kinds of municipalities are the ones that affect you here. First, they're a lower tier, or local municipalities, and those are the towns and the cities, the townships within a defined area, and that defined area can either be a county or a region, or one district. Muskoka is a district. So the county and the region and the district are upper tier, and the townships and towns and cities are the lower tier. Here's the key. The powers are divided between the upper tier and the lower tier, and they're set out in the legislation. So if you need to know if the lower tier municipality has responsibility, staff are able to advise council with respect to that. That's an important aspect of it, but all the powers are there. In municipalities now, it doesn't matter what they are called. You can't tell by the size, by the name. For example, Dryden in northwestern Ontario has a population of about 8,500 people. It's a city. Some of the GTA municipalities, Oakville, for example, is a town with over 200,000 people. So you can't tell. A number of municipalities now have adopted the name the municipality of Red Lake, for example. That's the formal technical name of that municipality. We now come to what I think is maybe one of the most important sections in the Act. And when I talk about the Act, I'm talking about the Municipal Act. And this was brand new in 2001. And it's very short and it's really simple, but it's very impactful. And it's this. It says that all powers of a municipality shall, when you see the word shall, that's mandatory, shall be exercised by council. And council does that by passing bylaws. Now we know that to pass a bylaw, council must do it at an open meeting. So all powers of municipality shall be exercised by council. And you can trace back, you should be able to trace back virtually everything the municipality does through to a bylaw of council. Very important. Now notice it doesn't say members of council. It says council, this collective body sitting as a decision-making body. So let's see how that plays out. I said that the bylaws had to be passed at a public meeting. Here's what I think is a duly constituted public meeting. First, you have to give notice. Municipalities have to give notice of all their meetings. All the council meetings, regular and special, open and closed, and all the committee meetings. That's an element of transparency and accountability. People are entitled to know when the municipality is meeting and what they're meeting for. And that includes putting out an agenda so that people know what items council or the committee is dealing with. The meeting has to be open to the public. Public's entitled to attend. The courts have consistently said over the years that the primary purpose of the public when it comes to municipal meetings, municipal council, is the ability to observe. And that's another one of the elements of accountability and transparency, the ability to see how decisions are made on behalf of the municipality. There has to be a quorum present. I'm not good at math, so I always deal with 5-person councils because I run out of fingers. If a quorum has to be present, if there's 5 members of council, that's 3. 3 members have to be present either electronically or physically in the room. That didn't used to be the case until 2 years ago. You had to be physically in the room, but electronically or physically in the room, 3 of the 5. The next rule is decisions are made by majority vote. And that's the majority of those present at that meeting. So if all 5 are present, what's the majority vote? 3. 3 vote have to, the vote of 3 has to carry the day in order for the matter to pass. If there are only 3 members present, that's a meeting, but the vote only requires 2 of those 3 to vote in favor of something to pass it. That means that less than the majority of the council has voted in favor to exercise the power of the corporation. Sounds a bit strange, but that's in fact the rule. There must be a quorum, majority vote. And finally, the rule is that all members should vote. Heads of council chair the meetings, but they also have a vote. And I'm a strong believer that they should exercise that vote. I think it's important for them to be on the record in terms of how they're voting along with the rest of council. So how are local governments, how are municipalities open and transparent? Well, the first obvious one, we talked about open meetings, that's true. There is an ability to hold closed meetings, but you can only do it as a council or a committee on very specific terms. There are a limited number of subject matters that have to be complied with. You have to fit within one of those. You have to follow rules to get into the closed meeting, and you have to follow a set of rules within the closed meeting, which you can do. So That's a level of transparency in terms of the ability of the public know that there is a closed meeting and what the general nature of the subject matter is. Council has to tell that. In addition, there are a whole series of policies. You can see them listed on the screen. But these are council policies, and they're policies that are intended to be put in place and maintained, kept up to date. The last two, the council member and staff policy, notice it doesn't say council and staff policy, it says council member. It's individual members of council in relation to staff. And that policy gets tied into the code of conduct for members of council. That's relatively new. And so is the parental leave and pregnancy leave for members of council. That's pretty new as well. Notice on this list there is a policy called the Accountability and Transparency Policy. If you're thinking of running for council, you need to take a look at that policy. It will give you a sense of how your municipality is being accountable and is being transparent. It's really important. So there's a whole series of aspects of how local government is accountable and how it's transparent in terms of its decision-making process. So who does what? Well, the province has set out in the Municipal Act job descriptions. Job description for council, job description for the head of council, the mayor or the reeve, whatever the title might be, and the job description for staff. It's important to recognize and to realize that those job descriptions are applicable to municipalities across the province. And as I said at the beginning, often things get off the rails when people fail to have a sense of understanding of what those responsibilities entail. So I want to take you through them very quickly. This is just a very quick summary of what's in the legislation. Municipalities act like a board of directors of a corporation. Municipalities are corporations, by the way. They are municipal corporations. They're not business corporations. They're municipal under the provincial format, if you will, of provincial regulation that sets them up. Councils represent the public. And I think that's true. Every member of council expects that they are going to be representing the public, bringing the views of the public to the council for debate, the representation of your community and how people are heard is a really important one. We'll talk about that in a minute. Municipalities or council has an obligation to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. Municipality in that provision has two meanings. First is the community, your community, the municipality of whatever. Councillors have an obligation to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. And I believe that councillors do that. People run for council because they want to be acting in the best interests of the community. But municipality has a broader meaning. And that broader meaning means the municipal corporation. Councillors have an obligation to act in the best interests of the municipal corporation. By the way, that same concept and that same provision is in the insurance policy that municipalities have. And the insurer requires that not only council members, but staff act in the best interests of the municipality. Council acts collectively, as I've said. Council, if you're describing council, is an it is not a they. It's a single body with a number of component parts, members, and those members vote, and that decision of it, the body, becomes the decision and the exercise of power by the council. There is nothing in the act, nothing in any act that gives members of council any management role within the municipality. The act is clear. Council is the decision-making body. Council sets policy on behalf of the corporation. And we'll see how that plays out in just a few moments. Members of council have limited powers. Frankly, they aren't the boss of staff. They have no right or ability to direct work that staff are about to do. The powers are limited. They have a limited ability to see all the documentation within the municipality. They're only entitled to see that which is required to fulfill their mandate as a councillor. So that's the role of council. That's what the province has said is the role and the responsibility of council in each municipality across the province. What about the head of council? The Municipal Act used to contain the description for mayor and reeve and warden and chair, and that all disappeared in the 2001, the new act, and simply referred to all of these titles as head of council. There's one exception in the province, and that is in Niagara on the Lake. And it has not merely a mayor, but has a Lord Mayor. And it received that by way of private legislation back in the 1980s. Today, any member of council can change the title given to its head of council. And that's happened in this county, where the head of council in a number of places went from reeve to be mayor. And council was able to do that after 2001 by passing a bylaw to do that. Heads of council preside over council meetings. In the Act, it's far more specific. It says to conduct meetings efficiently and effectively. It's a very different world to sit in the mayor's chair than it is to sit as a council member. The responsibilities are different. The perspective of everything that's going on is a very different aspect to it. The Act says also that the head of council provides leadership to council. Notice it says to council, not to the organization as a whole. And we'll see how that plays out in a minute. Heads of council speak on behalf of the municipality. That's important, but how do they know what to say? Well, they say what council directs them in terms of the bylaws and the resolutions passed. The head of council has an obligation to speak on behalf of the municipality and talk about the decisions council has made. There's an obligation on the heads of council to provide information to council on matters that council has to give consideration to from time to time. And you can see those there: administrative matters, controllership, and on accountability and transparency. That's all part of this leadership role. There's another aspect of being a head of council that deals with the issue of the fact that the head of council is the chief executive officer. Now, if you have a business background, you'll say, well, the CEO in business is the day-to-day manager, and that's right. That's not the case in local government. And it was never a defined term. It was never set out in the Act in terms of what it meant, but it is now. In I think it was 2006, the province recognized that the responsibility for day-to-day management rests with the position of the chief administrative officer, the CAO, and not with the head of council as the CEO. So the province set out what it means to be the CEO, the head of council to be the CEO. And if you read through it, the conclusion that you'll come to is that the head of council becomes the champion, if you will, or the cheerleader for the municipality. Some of you will have heard of Mayor Hazel McCallion, former mayor of Mississauga. She was a prime example of how you could become a cheerleader. And I've talked to other people who say, well, our mayor is exactly the same, out there selling the community, telling the people what a terrific place it is. That's the role of the head of council. And that's what the province intended when it said it was the CEO. Let's flip over to the staff side for a minute. this is taken out of the Act, pretty, not exact wording, but pretty close. And before I go through this, I just want to mention two staff that I think you need to pay attention to. One is the CAO. If you're on council, the person that provides advice to council on matters within the municipality is the CAO. That's the top person in the top administrative person in the organization. There are other people in the organization called statutory officers. These are people that are appointed to offices that the province sets out duties and responsibilities. And the one that becomes really important to council in terms of meetings is the clerk. And in terms of the election, if you have election questions, it's the clerk's office you should be contacting with those questions as we approach the time for the election itself. So there are other statutory officers, but for the purpose of today, the CAO gives advice to council on issues generally. The clerk gives advice to council on issues relating to meetings. The clerk is the expert on the procedure bylaw. That's really important. And the clerk's there to help you understand that document. It can be pretty substantial at times. But here's what the Municipal Act says about staff's role. Staff have an obligation to undertake research and provide advice to council. And council has an obligation to receive that advice. So what does that mean? Well, undertake research means you do the background, you write a report, so the reports that go to council, and you make a recommendation. Staff should be making recommendations to council so that council knows the advice and the direction that staff is proposing that council take on a specific matter. So council, in effect, the staff to council, staff become the primary resource for information for members of council. Once council makes a decision on a matter, staff have an obligation to implement it and go from there. It's staff's obligation to determine how to implement that decision of council. Staff have obligations to put administrative and policy procedures. Every department in a municipality has procedure manuals, how they do the things day to day, when you go out to clean a road, how you put an agenda together, how the Treasury Department deals with issues around taxes and collection of taxes. So that's the staff role. And it's pretty clear that the council is the decision-making body and staff implement. But council makes decisions after receiving advice from its staff by way of reports and recommendations. I've used this slide for I don't know how many years. This is a reference to a book back in the 1970s by Osborne and Gabler. And I think it's a good image that council should steer the boat rather than row it. Staff are there to row it. Council is there to determine the direction and steer it, but not to be doing the work to get there. Interesting image. Let me take a quick drink of water here. I shouldn't be drinking out of bottles of water. I did that one time at the Walkerton Clean Water Center, which was a big mistake. I haven't been back since. I want to talk about municipal governance because this is really important too. And in my world, municipal governments mean how does council make a decision? What are the processes in place? What are the structures in place to allow council to make decisions? Because that's the primary role of council. Well, we know that staff is the number one resource. Staff provide the written reports, provide recommendations, provide the motions that council is going to be considering, draft the bylaws. A second form of information providing by council is council can set up a committee structure. And I can tell you that virtually every municipality in the province has a different committee structure. They vary one way to another. but they all have some fundamentals. And the basic fundamental is this: that if council is going to create a committee, it should be creating that committee for the purpose of providing advice to council. Committees pass recommendations and they get forwarded on to council. Committees do not make decisions. They make recommendations, and those recommendations go to council for consideration. That's how you have committees set up. Some places have very detailed and multi-level committees, which frankly, in my experience, just slows the decision-making process down. People want municipalities to deal with issues in an effective and efficient manner. And if you have too many levels of committees or subcommittees, I was dealing with one recently that there were 3 levels before a matter ever got to council. And those took place over several weeks. Everybody was frustrated with it. They need to be looking at a different model. So committee structure is really important. The public plays a huge role in terms of giving advice to council. The public wants to be heard. People want to put their point of view forward. Council, in its procedure bylaw, determines how the public get heard and when members of the public get heard, and these are heard by way of delegations. Council controls the agenda, and it's important to do that. The public has the opportunity to make comment to members of council, not just through meetings, but they're in the community. People can call you. We all know that members of council are talking to different groups and different people on a regular basis. So the public play a huge role. But as I said before, the courts have said the primary purpose of the public at meetings is to observe, to see that it's being transparent. I talked earlier about local boards, these entities that do very specific, take on very specific responsibilities like libraries or conservation, and they're done under separate statutes, and each of those boards is an independent entity but has a defined relationship within the legislation to the municipal council. They serve an important purpose as well. If you are seriously thinking about running for council, you better love meetings. I mean, you better love meetings because you're going to be attending a lot of them. I've had people say to me, I'm running for council because it's big bucks and few hours. Well, the reality is it's few bucks and big hours, particularly when you put local board attendance and committee attendance on top of council meetings. And you're going to have to attend those meetings, but even more so, you're going to have to be good at meetings because you have to find the majority of people on council who are willing to support ideas that you're bringing forward. Remember, the votes has to be a majority of the members present. So meetings become a significant aspect of life as a municipal councillor. One of the two, I describe it as one of the 2 key documents in the municipality is the procedure bylaw. And the procedure bylaw sets out the rules for meetings, but it sets out your governance model, and it sets out relationships between council and the head of council, between council and staff, and between council and the public. That's really important. And so the procedure bylaw becomes a significant document that you should become familiar with if you're seriously thinking about running for council. You may want to read it through and get a sense of what it's about. Municipal council meetings are very different than meetings of other associations or boards or whatever. There are some very specific rules, and council gets to write the rule book. That's pretty cool when you think about it. Council sets the rule book, and it's its rules that it passes and puts in place by way of the bylaw. Let me just get you through part of this, and I think we'll take a few minute break just after that to let everybody stretch. Let me make a bit of a personal observation how your life will change the day after you've been elected to office. You'll be pretty happy. You'll be thinking, everybody loves me. That won't last long, but that's how you will feel at that point. You'll be elated by it. You'll be excited by it. It's like showing up for your first day of kindergarten when you go to your first council meeting. People will look at you differently. People will talk to you differently. Even your friends will talk to you differently. People will treat you in a very different way than they did before you were elected. And that's probably appropriate. You've now become, once elected, once you take office, you've become a community leader. You've taken on this significant role to provide leadership to the community through the local council. It's really important. And this is a 24/7 job. You cannot escape it. No matter where you go in the municipality and often well beyond, people will want to talk to you as a member of council. People will call you and contact you and use social media to reach you at all hours, and they'll want to chat about issues and they'll want to talk to you about issues. Expect that will happen, and will happen very quickly, I believe. If you are thinking of running for office, it requires a total commitment. It may be, you may hear this is a part-time position, and you'll get paid as a part-time position, but this is really full-time because you're thinking about it, it's on your mind all the time. And in my experience, over the members of council I've known over the years, and that's quite a few, it completely consumes you. And it's interesting, I talk to people after they leave local government, whether they're elected or whether they're staff, and the first comment they make to me is, I can't believe how much this consumed me, how I was so involved in every aspect of local government, everything that was going on. It's really, really significant, and it has an impact on your family. One of the things I encourage people to do is talk to your significant other before you run for council, because it has an impact on them as well. In some very small ways, but some very significant ways. There was an issue in Sudbury a number of years ago now. And Sudbury was one of the last municipalities in Ontario to have a store hours bylaw. Everywhere else people had gotten rid of it, but Sudbury had one. And one of the councillors came to me and said, I'd like to get this bylaw amended by adding 2 more hours of store time a week that stores may be open. 2 hours. And my response to him was, don't do it. If you're going to do it, just repeal the bylaw and open it up. And he said, no, I want to be fair, 2 hours. It became one of the hottest issues in Sudbury in my entire 23 years in the city. People were furious with council. Here's what that meant. A member of council would go into a store or go walking down the street, and people would stop them and berate them. How dare they increase this time people had to work? That's okay. They expect it. But here was the reality of it. The spouse of a member of council would walk into a store and they would be berated for how badly their spouse was acting on council. This was over 2 hours. The councillor came back to me after and said, we should have gotten rid of the whole thing. It couldn't have been worse than what it is. So spouses are impacted by this, and you need to have a conversation with your family around this. I did a session probably 3 elections ago, and I did this sort of session before the election, and had someone with me who was a former mayor of a municipality, a 2-tier municipality. And he spoke, and here's what he said about this issue of family. He said he was on council and he decided to run for mayor, and he ran and he won. And he was ecstatic that night. He was so thrilled. And he went home And he said to his wife, and she said, "That's really great. That's really terrific." He said, "And you know, not only am I the mayor, but I'm now sitting on county council." And he said, "I won." And his 8-year-old son was there. And the 8-year-old son's reaction, "I guess I lost." Being on council takes a lot of time, and it takes away from family time. So you need to give some thought to that. I'm not saying don't do it because of it. I'm saying you need to manage it. It's really important. And that was a poignant story that he told that day. I thought that, and it has just stuck with me over the years. You need to balance this commitment to your community and your commitment to your family. Talk to your significant others. The old system, you know, when we had phones in our houses and anybody could pick it up and answer it, you had to have a system of calls coming in that related to the municipality. That isn't nearly as significant now because everybody has cell phones, or mostly everybody. You can channel your messages. We're going to see a lot of issues and a lot of campaigning on social media this time, more I think than ever before. We're coming off a very peculiar 2 years where we've been doing everything online. The meetings have been online, Zoom, just like we're doing now. The interaction with the public, as I said, becomes important, not only for you as someone on council, but for your family as well. Another thing that will take you away from time from your family is your reading time, preparation for meetings. I know it's worse in a lot of places now, but when I left Sudbury, between the upper tier, the region, and the city, the average reading for the two council meetings that 1 week was over 160 pages. That's a lot of reading. You better love reading. You better love reading as much as you love going to meetings. And you have to read it. I'll tell you why when we get to the conflict of interest legislation. It becomes really significant because you are responsible for every item that is going to council. So you need to be cautious about it. I've talked about meetings. I've talked about open and closed meetings. But family is a really significant part of the decision for you to run for council and take part in public life. It's a much broader decision than just an individual one, in my experience. I think we'll take 5 minutes and we'll just give you a chance to stretch, and we'll be back and we'll finish off with the personal responsibility issues, and we'll go from there.